Good morning. My name is Edris Harrell, and we welcome you to this morning's worship service here at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington. Whether it's your first time attending, your 10th time, or your umpteenth time, whether it's the start of your spiritual journey or you have settled comfortably into a spiritual practice, and most importantly, no matter who you are welcome here. Today is the first day of our summer camp for adults. For the next 3 days, we're going to have lots of fun, educational, and spiritual activities, so check out our website, firstuuwilm.org, or there's also schedules in the parish hall. And now let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Larry Piers, minister here at First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, in case you forgot who I am, since I've been away for the last several weeks. It's great to see you. It's great to be with you on this day. As we gather for worship this morning, I want to offer these words by Sophia Lyon-Fahs. She says, "The religious way is the deep way, the way that sees what physical eyes alone fail to see, the intangibles of the heart of every phenomenon. The religious way is the way that touches universal relationships, that goes high, wide, and deep, and that expands the feelings of kinship." In our time of worship today, may we indeed have that experience of going deep, high, and wide. So may it be. This week, the World Parliament of Religions will be gathering in Chicago. The World Parliament first met over 130 years ago, and many Unitarians and Universalists were instrumental in and played an important role in its formation. Today, the Parliament attracts participants from more than 200 diverse religions, indigenous and secular beliefs, and more than 80 nations. I want to acknowledge this meeting by reading their call to conscience now. This Parliament will be the most important and largest gathering of the world's religious and spiritual leaders and practitioners, uniting in a collective, courageous, and clear reply to the most dangerous crisis confronting us today: authoritarianism. This existential, expanding, global scourge is manifesting in tyrants and strongmen who commit crimes against humanity, suppress fundamental freedoms, subvert democracies, and murder the truth with lies. These bullies and despots are pursuing nationalist wars and winking at domestic terrorism. They are fostering hate and the resurgence of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, misogyny, and racism. And they are attempting to misappropriate religions to justify the unjustifiable. Every faith has as its core a summoning to ease the suffering of others and to contribute to a just, peaceful, and sustainable world. Today, the Parliament of the world's religions issues its call to conscience to people of faith and spirit, to the people of Chicago, to all people of conscience, to stand together in defense of the dignity, the freedom, and the human rights of all. So as I ring this meditation bell 3 times, may we join our hearts and minds with those who are attending the Parliament of the World Religions this week, and with people of conscience across our globe. May we sense our own common concern and our common caring. May we hear this call and reflect upon our own responses.
For those of you at home, we invite you to light your chalice as we light ours here in the sanctuary. And I'll be reading the words by Melanie Davis. Under the right circumstances, playing with fire is a delight. Imagine being gathered around a fire pit as the crackling flames invite us to sing, dance, and roast a marshmallow or two. Our chalice also invites us to play, although with ideas rather than with marshmallows. The flame encourages us to explore who we are, who our neighbors are, and where we are on our spiritual journeys. Today, we light this chalice in the spirit of play. Let us trust the light to guide us in this hour and in the days to come, finding joy along the way. So now please rise, embody your spirit, and join in singing hymn 23, Bring Many Names. We'll be singing verses 1, 4, 5, and 6. And following the hymn, please remain standing to affirm our mission.
Bring many names, beautiful and good, celebrated, terrible and
please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action. You may be seated.
I want to introduce our time for meditation and prayer this morning by this reading from John Torrant's book, The Light Inside the Dark, Zen, Soul, and the Spiritual Life. He points out that soul, however we understand it, is not just related to our interior life, but is reflected in our relationship to nature and to the world around us. The two powers of soul and spirit are not just inward events, not butterflies imprisoned in the body's cage. It is good to remember that soul and spirit also exist beyond us, touching the mountains and streams, bridges, roads, and the ways we teach our children. Between them, they bring the glow of life to what we perceive. If a stream is dirty, so is the soul. If a forest is made into a wasteland, so is the spirit lost and disoriented. Spirit and soul have different symptoms. The missing sweetness in our cities, the homelessness and choked freeways, these are the public pains of the wounded soul. When we treat ourselves too much as machines, our actions come to bad ends. The worst consequences of the soul's neglect is a lack of love of our own lives, of each other, of the future, and of the suffering planet. Soul wants time and patience to confer loveliness. It wants to be wooed and longs to find the face of the beloved in the gardens and apartments of the city. Spirit offers us the possibility of equanimity because it sees suffering as transformation. It knows that shopping doesn't stave off the terror of mortality. Only the experience of participating in eternity will set our hearts at rest. Spirit's blessing is its unpredictability and its predilection to descend on the heads of the despised and poor. For Spirit, even the rocks and rivers ourself, alive and full of magic, as our first love. So in the time of silence that follows, may we take time during the silent meditation to sense our connection to our inner life. Breathing in and breathing out, perhaps slower than usual. And breathing from the place of the heart. As we breathe in, may we feel our connection with all that is. And as we breathe out, may we recommit to our connection with nature and the world. As we breathe in, may we connect to all that is. And as we breathe out, may we recommit to our connection to our precious ailing earth and our wondrous and suffering world. With each breath during this silent meditation, May we deepen our connection to all that is. Each week when we gather, we take some time in each other's company to attend to the joys and the concerns that we are carrying in our own hearts and in our collective heart as a congregation. So let's pause for a moment and attend to what it is that we are carrying in our own hearts. And in a moment, if you so choose, I'll invite you to share those joys or those concerns, or you may write them on the chat if you're joining us online. So what are the joys that you are holding in your heart this morning that you would like to share?
Being a Unitarian Universalist.
And now we will share the concerns that we have on our heart, and you started us there. I'm going to say it a little louder so all can hear. As you know, there have been these horrible fires in Hawaii, and particularly in Maui. And we have two members, Vidya and Deborah Sager, who live in Lahaina. I don't know what their situation is. But if you happen to know them, please hold them in your heart, connect with them if you can, and with all of those who have been impacted by these fires. Very devastating to see and to hold alone. What other concerns might you have on your heart this morning? We need not hold these joys or these sorrows alone, but share them with one another so that we can share in the celebration and share the burden alongside of one another. May all whose names were spoken, those unspoken, find peace and healing this day.
I'll be reading a parable adapted from The Light of a Thousand Suns by Jacob Trapp. A teacher once gathered a group of children around him. It was springtime, and the teacher said, "I saw something the other day, and I wonder if any of you have seen it. If you know it, don't say what it is. I went out and saw it coming up from the ground about 10 inches high, and on top of it was a little round ball of fluff, and if you went whoof, a whole galaxy of stars flew out. Now, what was it like before the little ball of stars appeared?" One said it was a little yellow flower like a sunflower, only very small. "And what was it like before that?" A little girl said it was like a tiny green umbrella, half closed with a yellow lining showing. "Yes, but what was it like before that?" One of them said it was a little rosette of green leaves coming out of the ground. "Now, do you all know what it is?" They roared back, "Dandelion!" "And did you ever pick dandelions?" Most of them said yes. But the teacher said, "No, you can't pick a dandelion. That's impossible. A dandelion is all these things you mentioned and more. So whatever you picked, you got only a fragment of something or other. You can't pick a dandelion because a dandelion isn't a thing, it's a performance. And you know, every living thing is a performance, even you." While this parable is subject to many interpretations, it is a reminder that we are ever and always in the process of becoming or performing, in the words of the parable.
Thank you, Edris. So in this simple parable, Jacob Trapp captures what otherwise might seem like a very complex idea. He uses the example of a dandelion to point out that all around us in nature, everything is in process. Everything is becoming, including us. He proclaims that you can never pick a dandelion since you would only have a fragment of what a dandelion is. Could it be true as well that you can never point to yourself or to another and say, "This is me, that is her," because you would only have a fragment of what you or she is, only a fragment in our ongoing unfolding, only a moment in time of who we truly are. Some Buddhists would say, yes, that is correct. They understand that very basically, anatta is the teaching that there is no permanent, eternal, unchanging, or autonomous self inhabiting our bodies or living our lives. Now, to clarify a little further, Mark Epstein, who's a contemporary Buddhist psychotherapist, states that the Buddha did not dispute the relative reality of the conventionally appearing self, but he did believe that we expend an extraordinary amount of time and energy propping it up and protecting it, reinforcing the centrality of our separateness. Does that make sense to you? In contrast to anatman, no self, is the Vedic teaching of the Buddha's day, which taught that there is within each of us an atman, or an unchanging and eternal soul or identity. Now, I'm not here this morning to argue one or the other. In fact, my life experience conveys to me, and perhaps to you as well, that yes, there is an ever-changing, ever-becoming self that we share with all of nature, and this ever-changing, always becoming aspect of who we are feels so true. And we might also say that, yes, there does also seem to be an enduring, unchanging self, what some call soul. At times we are fascinated, aren't we, with that observable process of this ever-changing, always becoming quality of things in nature, all around us, and even in our own lives. And at other times we are entranced with what seems permanent and mysteriously unchanging in ourselves and around us. I would say both are true. Could it be that we sense something in our lives that connects us across our various stages of life, across all the changes in our life, like a thread? Indeed, in his poem, The Way It Is, William Stafford offers this perspective of this unchanging thread that we follow. Perhaps you know this poem. He writes, "There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen, people get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old, and nothing you can do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread." This may seem abstract or absurd, poetic, but not real. However, I had the unexpected experience of this thread in a recent visit to one of the neighborhoods I grew up in early in my life in Baltimore. I hadn't been back there in a number of years, and during this visit, my memories of my younger self appeared to me as a very familiar self. Though many years and many changes have occurred around me and within me ever since. Just being there, I became acutely aware that that period of my life from 6th grade through 8th grade seemed to be the time when I first followed some of my own inner inclinations that I've continued to travel with throughout my life in one way or another. I hear echoes of that verse from May Sarton's poem, "Now I become myself." As these memories surface during that trip, I seem to have an intangible sense of what otherwise would be that elusive thread that I follow. To give you a quick snapshot of that time, I'm providing a few photos taken on that recent trip as it's a way to illustrate my world then. At the center of my life at that point was this Catholic school and church that I attended, St. Thomas Aquinas Church and School, which doesn't look like that photo at all. Or that photo. Just keep going, they say. Keep going, one more slide. Okay, I guess the slides are interestingly arranged. And first, you could have seen a picture of the church where we went every Sunday, and as a part of St. Thomas Aquinas School, where we went as a whole school on first Fridays of the month. And by then, it was a requirement to fast before the service, before communion. So when we got back to our classrooms, we were given donuts and milk, chocolate milk or regular milk. I pity the poor nun who was faced with capturing the attention of a group of 7th graders, buzzing on sugar-glazed donuts and chocolate milk. Just remembering this, I can still feel the effects of that sugar high. And then when folk masses began, we had church in the basement of the school where we sang many of the popular folk songs of the time, civil rights songs, as well as a whole new genre of Catholic folk songs. But it was a memorable era of what was considered by the standards of time the modernization of the Catholic Church. We were just immersed in it. Now, you see the picture of the statue of St. Thomas Aquinas, which stood halfway down the block between the church and the school, which is kind of on the right, the right of the photo. I remember playing dodgeball or softball in the school playground. I remember May processions in the playground and fundraising bazaars. And I distinctly remember all the conversations that I had with Sister Caroline, who took time to talk with me and who gave me a feeling of encouragement by those conversations. So on reflections, it seems like a self-contained environment of church and school and playground. And indeed, it was a subculture where many immigrants and children of immigrants, first and second immigrant families like my own, gathered on common ground. The school library was in the basement of the convent, just diagonally across from the school, and here I devoured all the various biographies of various famous and not so famous people, scientists and doctors and social reformers and politicians. I was fascinated by the various ways that people had lived their lives, overcame obstacles, or did remarkable things to help others or to change the world. And since the books were biographies, I could hold, it seems, their lives in my hand and know by the end of the book how their lives had turned out. It was a satisfying feeling that nurtured something in me. And of course, included in the mix at the Catholic School Library were those shelves that included all the lives of the saints, biographies of various women and men who had been pronounced Catholic saints because they seemed to have done remarkable things. They endured various hardships, even martyrdom sometimes. And if it were to believe, they continued to help people after their death by the miracles that were recorded and were used as a confirmation of their sainthood. Anyone else in the room share some of that background experience with me? Okay, great. All right, so you know what I'm talking about. But come to think of it, I was never all that interested then in reading Marvel comics or even Mad magazine, as some of my friends did, maybe because I already had a sense of the real. I already had a sense of the fantastical and the mysterious that was satisfied through my own independent reading program of these biographies and these lives of the saints. This is odd, and it's unusual, I have to admit. But I was, for some reason, driven to read about people's lives and to find glimmers of hope between the pages, sparkling possibilities and molecules of meaning. By the end of 7th and throughout 8th grade, I also began to venture outside of this encapsulated Catholic bubble. When I started frequenting the public library and discovered that they would allow me to take up to 3 books out at a time, whole new worlds opened up for me. I was pleased to see the library was still there on this recent trip. I made my own journeys then that included taking the bus to downtown Baltimore on my own, watching lacrosse practice at Johns Hopkins University, making non-Catholic friends in nearby neighborhoods, and going to the Baltimore Museum of Art. Since it was the beginning of the ecumenical movement, Catholics were then allowed to attend some special services in Protestant churches without a visa. And I explored that as well. And on that recent visit, when all of these memories of how I spent those initial 3 years in Baltimore came back to me, I recognized something that's very familiar to me. I recognized probably what William Stafford calls the thread. the unchanging aspect of self that we follow, even as around us all things are changing. In many ways, I now feel so different from that younger version of myself. Different religion, different neighborhood, different age, different body, different degree of shyness. I was shy back then. Different season of my life. And however, there is something that I recognized that was so familiar to who I am, that seemed to really begin to blossom like the early buds of a dandelion. During those years, it was a questing, engaging, and adventuresome part of me that I have honed and cultivated over the years for the most part. For whatever reason, I had this impulse in me for discovery, for learning, towards following my interests and finding worlds and people that led beyond my smaller world would have ever exposed me to. Retrospectively, I have a deep gratitude for that part of me, however it arose, however aligned or unaligned I might be with it at this particular time. I wonder how encapsulated not only my world, but also myself might have been otherwise. I wonder how ill-equipped I might have been to face some of the dramatic changes and challenges that lie ahead of me in my late adolescence or later years. I found a resourcefulness that sparked, I think, a resilience in me that I can only receive as grace and not just grit. As I reflect upon and tell you this story, I can sense that thread that Stafford talks about, I can feel its tug within me over the decades of living. I can only pause and notice it with gratitude and with wonder. But enough about me. How about you? I wonder if you could pause now and ask yourself, throughout all the changes in your own life, all the challenges and uncertainties, how might you describe what Stafford calls the thread you follow? What feels very familiar, very consistent, or even persistent about who you are and what you have sensed in life? What seems immutable across the seasons of your own life? And now I will pause and give you a chance to reflect on those questions. And perhaps following the service, you might share whatever comes to you with someone else, or sometimes this week, or even write about it as I just did. So let's pause for a moment and ask that question. What feels very familiar, very consistent, even persistent about who you are or what you have sensed in life? What is that thread for you? How was that? Did you have an insight? Did you have something that you could identify? You can kind of nod or do some kind of movement so I know you're somewhat engaged. I know some of you are annoyed or dismayed that I'd actually take time to do reflection in real time with you. Some of you are probably saying under your breath, "He's back." So whether this thread that I sense and perhaps you sense is actual is not the point. In fact, it may be more real than real. And reflecting upon his many years as a Jungian analyst, James Hollis testifies to this thread in the experiences of many of the people that he's worked with from many walks of life and many contexts. From his decades of experience, he speculates that something is always trying to work its way through us into the world. Growing and developing require being open to that encounter, surrendering to it, and serving the exfoliation of meaning it brings to us. He also reiterates his understanding that we're always becoming as the dandelion in the parable. And he recognizes that there may be a tendency in us to not cooperate with that ever ongoing change, or there may be a tendency sometimes for us to actually participate with that becoming and that change. He writes, "Change is the nature of nature, and we are part of nature. Change is how life renews, but ego consciousness seldom welcomes change because change undermines our fantasy of sovereignty, understanding, and control." So if the self is always in process, always becoming, and there is a thread like a momentum within us that is urging us on, just as I seem to have recognized recently in my trip to Baltimore, this does not mean we are just passive recipients of this. In fact, we always have this choice. We can be aligned or unaligned with what James Hillman calls our soul code, in code, C-O-D-E, not cold, in his book by that title. To be clear, Hillman does not believe that the soul is an entity, a thing inside a person, in case we're accustomed to thinking about it that way. Hillman defines soul in this way. It's a perspective rather than a substance, a viewpoint towards things. It is reflective. It mediates events and makes differences. In his book, The Soul's Code, In Search of Character and Calling, he advocates for an acorn theory of the soul. He holds that each individual holds the potential for their unique possibilities inside themselves already, much as an acorn holds the pattern for an oak, invisible within itself. Just, I might add, as the dandelion does in all of its own stages of becoming. Richard Gilbert, a Unitarian Universalist minister and religious educator, says that we grow up absorbed rather than absurd. Now, I think that verdict is still out, but it might not be either or, it might be both and, but I digress. He claims that life is a fascinating and absorbing experience. And by absorbed, he says, I mean to include or incorporate as part of the self, to take in, to be intently engrossed in, to be engaged with life in all of its dimensions. And he draws upon this familiar poem by Walt Whitman's collection, Leaves of Grass. There was a child that went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon and received with wonder, pity, love, or dread, that object it became. And that object, he became a part of him for the day, or certain part of the day, or for many years, or stretching cycles of years. Being attentive to and open to our experiences that we absorb can seem very passive, yet there is indeed so much that we as humans pick up through osmosis. Think about how we learn language in our environment, what theorists call situational learning as a child. And this is the point I want to emphasize, that in the midst of all these remarkable forces that shape or compel us, or the whole self or our soul, we can also be intentional and forthright in shaping and creating experiences that help grow and deepen our whole self or our soul throughout life, without exemption of our age or our stage in life. The wounds of our earth and our society are a reflection of the state of our inner work or our soul work, as John Tarrant said in the reading I did to introduce the meditation. This intentionality is what originally attracted me to Unitarian Universalism as a late adolescent. This idea that we can participate in our own becoming, that we can be responsive and responsible to what our world is calling forth in us around compassion and works of justice. It's not a fate or a given. Richard Gilbert articulates this commitment within Unitarian Universalism in this way when he writes, "We are participants in a historical stream in which we swim for a time. We boldly proclaim that if we don't like the news of the world, then we should create some of our own." So I'm in awe of the thread and the soul code that seems to pull us along and find us again and again, that seems to serve us even when we are lost, forlorn, and uncertain. I'm in gratitude for the forces within nature and of spirit that carry us forward through losses and suffering to ever-changing unfolding of our connection to life and all of its wonders and mysteries. And at the same time, I'm so appreciative and challenged by the religious response of being intentional in creating some news of our own if our world is not going in the right ethical direction. I'm appreciative and challenged by the ways that we are called to respect and honor nature and participate in its unfolding in our own brief lives. None of this is abstract for me. I observe the manifestation of this thread or soul code that some people experience in their lives in many conversations, in small groups or one-on-one meetings. I also feel the call to be bold with our intentionality. I've been moved by the music created in this sanctuary. I've been inspired by the art created by members of this community. I've been stirred by the reflections and the sermons of our members. And today we manifest this intentionality as a religious community as we open our doors not just to our own congregation, but to those in the wider community for this second annual LifeStream Camp for adults with some family-friendly activities. We could have just ridden the summer out. Instead, through the efforts of our LifeStream Summer Camp team, Linda Sanders, Jerry Kunzelman, Stephanie Cloud, Janet Tillman, and over 20 presenters from within and outside of our congregation, we are providing a visible jump start to what we are about as an intentional community of faith. We will gather over the next 3 days to learn together from speakers and workshop presenters, a film and an artist, to see what might get stirred in our individual souls and our collective soul. We will gather to dance and to sing, to create art and to meditate and to play games, to practice improvisation and yoga so that we can connect with our own bodies and the creative spirit that wants to work within and through us as we discover ways to be available to it. We will welcome others who are not regularly part of our community to come and to experience what we value, what we aspire toward in terms of our own personal and spiritual development and for justice in our world. We gather to connect with one another and with what matters and with a creative event that sometimes is accidental, but sometimes is intentional. And so, this is who we are. We create news. We create experiences together that we might absorb. That may be our soul code as a Unitarian Universalist congregation. I'm glad that my 7th, 8th grade adventure led me eventually here to be standing in front of you this morning.
So this summer camp that Larry and I keep talking about is just one example of the activities and services that First Unitarian provides to the community. It's one of the ways that First U builds a third place for people in our local area. And many people in our society lack a third place, which is a sociology term that talks about the fact that it's a third place is outside of home and work. It's a place where people go to form relationships and build community. And this loss of a third place is one of the causes of our fracturing of society and our well-being. So, and First, you can be a third place for many people, thanks to our principles where we see value in every person. But First, you can't be a third place without your financial contributions or your gifts of time and energy. So during the music, we will see on the screen different ways that we can make a monetary donation. And for those of us here in the sanctuary, there's also the option of placing money in the baskets at the back after the service. So please join me in dedicating our offering. To the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives and these, our offerings. As we extinguish the chalice, I will read these words by Michael Schuler. We have reached the end of this time for the gathering of memory and for letting the imagination play with future possibilities. We have enjoyed magic moments and edified each other. Shall it be concluded then? Or will this adventure now commenced continue? Our separate paths converging, meeting, merging in the unending quest for love more perfect, the joyous struggle for meaning more sufficient and life more abundant. Is this ending to be an ending, or merely prelude to new, more glorious beginnings? I pose the question. In your hearts lies the answer.
I'm going to read a very short benediction written by Edward Everett Hale. I encountered this benediction on many days when I was walking through the Boston Public Garden, where there's a statue of Edward Everett Hale when I lived in Boston and worked at First Church in Boston. I read the same benediction yesterday at the board retreat. Our board spent all of yesterday, a big part of yesterday, planning for next year and articulating their goals as a board for this year. So I want to applaud them for the efforts that they have taken on your behalf. Edward Everett Hale. Look up and not down. Look out and not in. Look forward and not back. And lend a hand. I want you now to repeat it after me, each phrase. Look up and not down. Look out and not in. Look forward and not back. And lend a hand. So now I'm going to blow a whistle to officially open the LifeStream Summer Camp for adults with family-friendly activities. Please join us. Those of you many of you have registered and prepared. There may be some of you that make a decision on the spot. That's fine. I want to thank our LifeStream team, who I mentioned in the sermon. And I want to thank all of the people in our congregation and others who will be joining us for the workshops and activities that they have provided for us. So, ready? Oh, and the hymn, our final hymn is 354, We Laugh, We Cry.
We laugh, we cry, we live, we die, we dance, we sing our song. We need to feel there's something here to which we can belong. We need to feel the freedom just to have some time alone. But most of all, we need close friends we can call our very own. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found a need to be together. We have our hearts to give. We have our thoughts to receive. And we believe that sharing is an answer. A child is born among us and we feel a special glow. We see time's endless journey as we watch the baby grow. We thrill to hear imagination ocean freely running wild. We dedicate our minds and hearts to the spirit of this child, and we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found a time to be together, and with the grace of age we share the wonder of youth, and we believe that growing is an answer. Our lives are full of wonder and our time is very brief. The death of one among us fills us all with pain and grief. But as we live, so shall we, and when our times are done, the memories we shared with friends, they will linger on, and we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found a place to be together. We have the right to grow, have the gift to believe that peace within our living is an answer. We seek elusive answers to the questions of this life. We seek to put an end to all the waste of human strife. We search for truth, equality, and passage place of mind. And then we come together here to make sense of what we find. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found a place to be together. And in our search for peace, maybe we'll finally see, even to question family is an answer.